Hi everyone, today we're going to talk about coffee price differentials. I get questions all the time about differentials. Mostly people want to know what the differentials are, but I think that question reflects a diversity of ways we understand the concept of differentials. So today we're going to talk about this notion, where these numbers even come from, what they're supposed to mean, as well as how the prices, consumption, and production of different types of coffee have changed over the years, because of course differentials reflecting these specific grades and attributes are supposed to take care of the differences in supply and demand of these grades versus other grades. So first things first, I think we need to understand where differentials come from. So differentials as a result or differentials as a determinant. So differentials are commonly understood as a result. It's the difference between our transaction price and some reference. They could be positive or negative because we're subtracting one thing from another thing. If the reference price is greater than our transaction price, our differential is negative. If our transaction price is greater than the reference price, our differential is positive. In any case, the transaction price minus the reference price, that's our differential. So if you want to know what the differential is, well, you have to do your transaction first in order to calculate it. If we consider differentials in this way, they're nothing more than an arbitrary indicator. But the way people think about differentials in practice is as a determinant. If a differential is a determinant, then we have our reference price plus a known differential in order to calculate our transaction price. So if there is a pre-existing differential out there, where does it come from? How is it calculated? If this notion exists, then this is indicative of an informal consensus that this is what the differential should be. So people in the comments asking me what the differentials are, they're asking me to communicate what a bunch of other people believe that it should be. Because again, there is no natural or obligatory market price. There's only negotiation and consensus, and sometimes there are laws. So that's not very common anymore. So the only real differentials that exist out there and are knowable are the ones provided by the exchange. We know that all coffee to be tendered, to be accepted into certified stocks, has to be graded and qualify as mild Arabica coffee according to their own definition. But even still, based on the production country, we have different positive and negative differentials. So there is no negotiating these differentials because they're built into this futures contract, which is standardized, and the buyer and the seller have to agree to it. So I don't know where the idea of what is the differentials independent of this institution comes from, but I suppose it's based on this because they are telling you what the differentials are. That's what they are in the market. So if you are transacting based on that contract, well, then you must respect them because those are the rules. However, outside of this contract, outside of any commodities exchange, there are no rules as to what the differentials should be. Trading houses keep lists of differentials for all the different grades from all the different regions of all the countries, but that merely amounts to what they're willing to pay on that day. There's no authority that these are the differentials in addition to whatever reference must be paid in the physical market if we're talking about a free market. So in almost all cases, except for when we're tendering against the futures contract, differentials are negotiated freely, although those negotiations may not always seem completely free. But it's quite common that coffee sale contracts are priced in this way. For example, a lot of the time there will be a C price plus or minus whatever differential is determined by the buyer and the seller. Again, I don't mean that buyer and seller are going to have equal say in determining what the difference is going to be, just to say that that's how contracts are written a lot of the time. I'd say most of the time. So today I think the C price is at 170, say your differential is 30, so your total price is $2. Depending how that contract is made, it might be fixed in 2 months. By that time, perhaps the C price is at 150, but your differential is fixed at 30, so you have 180 instead of $2. A lot of times that's done because one of the parties or both are hedging against the C contract. And as I mentioned several times last video, if you're hedging using the C contract, your prices of physical coffee have to also correspond to the C contract, or else your hedge will not be effective. As we talk about differentials, another indicator that often comes up are the ICO prices. So the International Coffee Organization publishes their indicator prices every day. So we can see here we have a composite, which is a weighted average of these different grades. We have Colombian milds, other milds, Brazilian naturals, and Robustas. And in the physical coffee business, when people talk about differentials, a lot of times what they're really referring to is the difference between the C price and the ICO indicator price of whatever type of coffee they're talking about. But of course, there's nothing that says that the value, whatever value is, of this type of coffee, or what this type of coffee should be trading for, or what its equilibrium price is, necessarily corresponds to this indicator. It makes sense and it would be tidy to believe so, but it's important for us to take a look at where these indicator prices really come from. So according to the ICO, these are their words. Quotations shall be sought from at least 3 traders and brokers in, and there's a different paragraph for USA, Germany, and France, for each of the growths specified in paragraph 1. A growth is a life of one of these types of coffee. So essentially they're calling 3 traders and asking what the prices are, and that's where these indicators come from. Now, I'm grateful to the ICO for a lot of the important work that they've done over the years and decades, and they've been very generous with me personally. So I don't mean for this segment to criticize them and their work in any way. I just think it should be recognized that this is where these indicators come from. Traders get surveyed to indicate the prices, while they are the actual buyers. The buyers literally dictate the prices. I'm sure it's phrased in such a way that they should be providing prices that indicate what they see as the approximate equilibrium based on supply and demand conditions or something like this, but it doesn't change the fact that these are just the prices that the traders say. So let's have a look at the correlation between these indicator prices and the prices that are actually paid for physical coffee bought and sold. Now this is incredible. While for the C price, there's actually a terminal market. You can actually go there and sell physical coffee against that contract, whereas the ICO indicators are nothing more than indicators, and they're only valid in that there's a consensus that people believe that they should be valid. Nevertheless, the correlation between these indicators and the actual physical sale prices are higher than those between the C price and physical coffee. For mild Arabica, that correlation is 99.92%. For hard Arabica and Robusta, it's only marginally less. So these are the prices. They're not the prices because they're necessarily the physical equilibrium, and not because anyone's enforcing that coffee must be bought and sold for these prices, but simply because there's a consensus that they should be. In the last video, I talked a lot about anomalies with the C price, and I presented some evidence that it may not be perfectly indicating the supply-demand equilibrium of the precise physical product that's being traded there. In the specialty coffee world, there's also quite a lot of criticism of the use of the C price as our price reference, because of course, if we're talking about different products, different regions and people growing them, different people with different tastes buying them for different purposes, we cannot assume that the supply-demand conditions will dictate that their prices move perfectly in unison. So the response I hear a lot of the time in these discussions of the inadequacy of the C price to provide a price reference for all types of coffee is that, well, differentials make up for the differences in grades and quality. And yes, it's true that there are differentials because there are differences between the C price and these ICO indicator prices. And yes, it indicates that mild coffees like Colombian milds, a lot of which are considered specialty coffee, are higher almost all the time than the C price. There's no guarantee that this difference makes up for the potential differences in supply and demand. So the differentials only make up for the actual fundamental differences between the grades if they actually do. Just because there are differentials doesn't mean that those differentials complete that task. This is like saying that I did some exercise which made up for all the snacks I ate. It could, depending on the amount and type of snacks and the amount and type of exercise, but snacks then exercise of any magnitude don't necessarily cancel each other out. It's also really important to note the correlation between the C price and all of these ICO indicator prices, as well as the FOB prices, the actual average transaction prices of the different types of coffee. Basically, all except for Robusta are extremely correlated with the C price. So this is fishy. So if differentials should make up for the product heterogeneity, differences in supply and demand conditions of each of these coffee types versus the common denominator, then the prices that represent their physical equilibrium should fluctuate independently of the least common denominator. This extremely high correlation indicates that they do not. Rather, they largely move together. What's most surprising here is that the ICO indicator price, with the highest correlation with the C price, is not other milds, which generally trade close to par and are tenderable on the C market. Rather, it's Brazilian naturals that have the highest correlation, despite the fact that this is a grade of coffee that cannot even be traded there, further calling into question this notion that having a functioning terminal market ensures that the future price reflects physical equilibrium. This high correlation between the indicator prices of all of these grades of coffee, again provided by trading companies who are often involved in hedging, also supports the notion that physical prices must correspond to the futures price in order to make it an effective hedge. Similar to the data we saw in the table in our last video, here we can see the fluctuation of production of mild coffee in the dark line below and non-mild coffee in the lighter line above. We can see again that mild production has fallen 1.5% from 1990 to 2022, while its real price has fallen about 17%, which is curious and we explored in a previous video. Whereas non-mild coffee production increased 105%, they more than doubled, while its real price also fell, in this case 44%. Again, the fall in real price of mild coffee, despite its drop in production, it would only be possible in an efficient market if there were a reduction in demand for it, or if it were completely substitutable with non-mild coffee, both of which don't seem very plausible. So given the issues and the anomalies with all of these price indicators we've talked about, and the fact that it's unlikely that we're going to ever be able to come up with a price indicator that truly indicates the market clearing equilibrium price for each type of coffee product out there, I wonder what alternative mechanisms could we look into in order to price coffee in a way that makes a bit more sense for everyone. Well, one is to look at other price references. Now, I don't know of many other price references out there, but one of them is the Specialty Coffee Transaction Guide. This basically allows us to look at the prices that other people are paying and charging for different specific types of coffee based on cup score, lot size, origin country, and I believe destination country. This is an interesting initiative that I'm helping out with personally. So I'd encourage anyone who's interested in finding alternative pricing mechanisms for green coffee to sign up to become a data donor. All data is anonymized, so no one's going to share it with your competitors, but it's all put together in order to pull out insights based on the aggregate of everyone's data. I'll leave a link for that also so you can get involved if you're interested. Other approaches could focus on distribution of income. For example, set percentages of the consumer price based on the contribution of each actor. Another could be to equalize profit rates or profit sharing. Wouldn't be sharing if they're already equalized, but you know what I mean. This would be difficult because it would require understanding and accepting the cost of production of everyone along the chain. And third, another approach would be equalizing the value of labor that everyone contributes. Lastly, I've been hearing more and more about needs-based approaches. I think these have their caveats and pitfalls, which we might get into later, but one of those is living income references. There are several of these. I think a lot of them are in development and building kind of more resolution based on local situations, but this is one approach that's out there. Another would be based on production and operations costs, trying to make sure that no one's ever losing, but of course this will only get us so far. In any case, there are a lot of ways of looking at this, and I'm interested to hear if anyone out there has an idea or has heard of another way to price green coffee in addition to the ones I mentioned here. I'd love to hear about it. So this brings us to the end of our 4-part series on coffee pricing. Of course, this is not the end of the discussion, but the end of the introduction. So please leave me any questions you might have in the comments here. I'll try to reply to as many as I can or work them into future videos. Thank you.